Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Anthropology 340, Native Cultures of North America. We are down here in week 5. We are on Wednesday, week 5. We are going to talk about the ancient Pacific coast today, what life was like there before Europeans showed up. On Friday, we're going to talk about the colonial era. And then no class on Monday, the 19th. On the 21st, I'll be gone, but Jose will be here to talk to you about modern Pacific Northwest stuff, which will get us all caught up. And then on Friday is your test. And Jose and I are going to create a video review for you to do since I'll be gone and I'll be here to run it. So we'll make a video review. There's already a review sheet online, which you can find right here. Click on the review sheet. Well, actually, I turned it off. I will turn it back on after this class. But there will be a review sheet for you to take a look at very shortly. And that test is going to be due 1 week from Friday. And that's going to cover Pacific Coast, the Southwest, real engine, cultural characteristics and history of ancient North America, as well as our broad introduction. And remember, these tests are cumulative, so whatever's on this test, you probably aren't going to have to see again, which is always nice. Okay, so this is just kind of the general flow now of the semester. Pretty much throughout the rest of the semester, we'll have 1 week that's a little bit different because of presentations. But generally, we're going to do a day on the ancient, a day on the colonial, and a day on the modern for every region that we do throughout the semester. We've done the Southwest, and you've kind of seen how it works. And now we're going to do the same for the Pacific Northwest coast. So let's do it. Cultures of the Northwest coast. So we talk about the Pacific Northwest coast. It's a really interesting area, both culturally. There's lots of cultural diversity. Ecologically, if you've ever been to the area, it's really beautiful. It's a temperate rainforest, just 100+ inches of rain a year. And it's an area of cultural diversity. Lots of different indigenous groups living in this area of different cultural and often linguistic backgrounds, right? But sharing a very similar way of life. And we'll talk about some of that today. And if you're an anthropology major, it's also particularly interesting to you because this is where some of the classic ethnographic field work was done. Boaz and his Kwakiutl right here, kind of right off of Vancouver Island. His study of Kwakiutl people is one of kind of the most important early 20th century ethnographic works that there is. So this is kind of the Boaz's research among the, with the potlatch ceremony and things like that. That's all going to be right in here. Hi, Allison. Good. Yeah. So it's this area, it's a very kind of narrow area, right? The interior, the Rocky Mountains are kind of right in here. The interior of British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, Northern California is going to be very different from the coast, and we're going to see very different kind of groups up here in the plateau. But generally, it's fairly narrow. It's confined to this area. It's pretty close to the sea. These are seafaring people. Often kind of where the rivers come into the ocean is where we would find a lot of these communities, or on the islands kind of right next to that, right? And this allows them to access a lot of those resources throughout the year. You can access inland resources. You can go upstream. A lot of times going by river is, or at least hiking along the river is the easiest way to go upstream in a very, wooded, mountainous kind of area, or you can fish the coast. And this is also a salmon area. So, the yearly runs of salmon to their spawning beds upstream allow you as a ancient fisher person to stand there with your net and basket. And you can still do this today. When we went to Alaska, you stand there with a basket and you hold it out and the fish jump right in the basket. It's the easiest fishing you've ever done. It's really great. It's enough calories to build a civilization on. So we're talking about British Columbia and Canada, as well as Southern Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and maybe into Northern California. Again, just like in the Southwest, we often think of the Northwest coast as being Washington and Oregon, but there were no boundaries, there were no checkpoints, there was no passport control back in the day. So the people who lived, over on Vancouver Island and those who lived in Seattle had a very similar way of life, trading and exchanging with each other, probably related to each other. Even though today we like to, kind of disassociate that. Yep. It's pretty. If you've ever been there, it's pretty. It's very, very different from eastern New Mexico. It's overwhelmingly green. It's like so green it makes your eyes hurt, right? Everything is green, everything is wet. There's rain every day, or at least most days. You know, lots of water, lots of rivers, snow. There's some mountains. Also, like these kind of mountainous forests, coastal forests that come all the way down to the ocean, which is a pretty cool thing. And then the marine resources, again, are abundant, right? This is right along the Pacific coast, right here. And you got these Pacific currents that kind of move in a big circle clockwise around the Pacific, right? You're picking up nutrients in Japan and Siberia up through Alaska, and then it kind of deposits them along the coast, feeding, you know, bringing all this food here to supply. Probably most well known, the kelp forest, right? If you've ever been in California or something, these are really, you know, like a jungle of its own with adorable little seals and sea lions and fish and lots of things to eat, whales if you are an ancient hunter. It's honestly one of the most rich marine environments on the planet. These are people who you can literally walk outside of your, you know, in the old days, walk outside of your cedar plank house, get in your canoe, walk out, you know, paddle out into the ocean, you know, harvest a whole bunch of fish, maybe hunt a whale. You can go up in your rivers and you can like harvest salmon, like I said. You can hunt deer, you can hunt elk, antelope, lots of things to eat, which is really interesting. This very rich environment. We're going to take a look at some of these civilizations today. Hopefully we'll get to them. And it's one of the classic cases ethnographically or archaeologically in which we see pretty complex civilizations without agriculture. Why would that be unique or interesting? Why would that be interesting to us as anthropologists? Yeah, right. Like if you ever take an intro to archaeology class, they're like, people were hunter and gatherers for a long time, doing just like basic stuff, walking around. And then they invented agriculture, whether it's corn in the New World or, you know, wheat in the Old World. And then suddenly, boom, right afterwards, civilization. You get cities, you get laws, you get government, you get monumental architecture, you get people doing craft specialization, right? All this kind of stuff. And yet in the Pacific Northwest, we seem to see something approaching that, if not civilization, you know, at least pretty dang close, without agriculture, you know. So this is a good case study for alternate pathways, right? Civilizations and societies don't always develop in the same way. And this is an example of one that's built especially on marine resources. And we also see things similar to this in like Japan or something like that, or maybe in Polynesia, where you have, you know, fish-based economy. This is really one of the classic cases. Yeah, and it affects all kinds of things, right? From an ecological anthropology perspective, right? What environment you're in is going to affect a lot of things about your society, right? Things like how many people live in a given area, right? The more food you have, the more people you're going to be able to put in a small area, right? If not, you're going to see really dispersed hunting and gathering. Things about what people do for a living, how people interact. Are they peaceful? Are they warlike? How many settlements there are generally. All these things are going to be based on the environment. So we're going to talk. So as we kind of go through some of these ancient societies and the development of societies in the Northwest, I think it's good to keep the environment in mind because it is a very unique environment. So when we talk about the ancient times in the Pacific Northwest, generally, we're talking about 4 different prehistoric eras, right? Really early stuff. We're going to look at one of the earliest sites, Cooper's Ferry, just briefly. It's probably 8,000. A transitionary period to about 5,000. You know, it's like the archaic is what we would call it, maybe, or like the settling in period. And then kind of from 5,000 to 1,000 as people, you know, start to really take on this lifestyle. And then after 500, where we see the emergence of some of these groups who would, you know, be there during the colonial era. Go back. So the history of the Pacific Coast and the Pacific Coast people is really tied to that bigger question we talked about earlier with the settling of the Americas, right? When did people get here and how did people get here? And you can kind of see why that might be. This is, you know, 16 or 18,000 years ago, a map of the Ice Age, northern kind of North America and into Asia. And again, what do you notice about this map? Was that?
No ice on the other side.
There's no ice, and these things are connected, right? Spoiler alert, they're not connected anymore. You should have been out there. Alaska and Russia are separate. But during this time, they were connected, right? So this question of when did people get here? Did they come by walking and wait for the ice-free corridor? Did they come by boat and move down the coast? And if they came by boat, which, you know, we kind of established, if not the only way that people came, at least one of the major ways that people came, where are those boats going to go? Along the Pacific coast, right? So if you're going to go by boat, one of the places you're going to look, and you're an archaeologist interested in this question, one of the places you might want to look for evidence of that is along the Pacific coast, right? Because if people are coming by boat, you want to find evidence that they were there, especially down here in the like Oregon, Washington kind of region before the ice-free corridor opened up, right? And we've talked about while Clovis maybe at one time was the earliest site, now sites like, you know, the White Sands footprints and things like that are pushing those dates back. So it's super interesting. We find out there's a couple really early sites. We're going to show you Cooper's Ferry, but also Groundhog, Namu. These are, you know, it's not super interesting. It's not super important that you know those sites specifically, but just kind of the general idea. These sites show that there was lots of things going on at this time. The environment was changing, especially as the ice is melting, right? These areas are being uncovered, and you get the uplift actually of the land as the ice melts off. Doesn't have this massive weight on top of it, and actually kind of pops up. So it's really interesting that we can actually find some of these really early sites, even though they may be underwater today. They're pretty close to the surface, and we can find them. At this time period, really early on, it's pretty much what we would expect, right? That we see hunting and gathering groups, but rather than like at Clovis where they're hunting mammoths or things like that, or giant sloths, these are people who are focused on the ocean and the environment, what you would think of with people who, you know, do most of their times traveling by boat or doing fishing stuff, which is remarkably similar to what people were doing right until the time Europeans show up. Foraging from the forest on the interior, fishing in the rivers, going out to the ocean, hunting sea mammals like whales and killer whales and seals and things like that. Yep, we talked about that. Other people have talked about this as, you know, maybe a really good place to look because it's a very temperate place. Even today, it's very temperate there compared to maybe the interior of Alaska. So maybe this is a place we can look that during the last glacial maximum, when there's a lot of ice everywhere, right, you can kind of see along the coast, there's these islands, right? And we can geologically tell that some of these islands were never completely glaciated, right? That they were still forested, even while the mainland of Canada was iced over, right? So this lets us know that that's maybe a good place to check, right? It's a refuge from maybe the harsh environment, and people hung out there for a while, maybe until they start to move south. I want to show you this video. One of the earliest, there's lots of competition for early sites, but one of a really interesting sites from, this is from only a year ago, so it just came out. This is from Cooper's Ferry over in Oregon, so kind of on the southern end of the Pacific coastal region. And this is about the discovery of an ancient projectile point. And what these archaeologists are claiming may be the earliest spearhead in North America. So let's check it out. All right, so you just watched a video on Lauren Davis talking about the importance of Cooper's Ferry. Why is that site important? What do they find there? I'm pretty sure we just watched that video. Okay. What they find? Yeah, not just any old spear point, but the oldest, right? So what? It's old. What does that tell us? Why do we care, right? I mean, it's nice for Lauren. He gets to put that on his CV. I found the oldest spear point in North America, right? He's already famous. He doesn't need to be more famous than that. But why, kind of on a bigger level, why do we care? What does this tell us about anything? What was that? Yeah, it tells us when they got there, right? That this is nobody else is making spear points, right? It's only human occupation. So it tells us that people are there. That's pretty interesting. What else could it tell us?
It also tells you where the people are, especially the whole artifacts.
Yeah, old people, old artifacts. It also is very different looking artifact than maybe we see at Clovis, right? It definitely doesn't look like a Clovis one. Something else going on in the region. Probably adapted for hunting smaller game or hunting coastal things. I don't know, something else, right? It tells us maybe where they traded from, all kinds of stuff, right? We see other really early examples. Here's a cave. This is like just north. It's like right on the southern Alaska, almost when you get into Canada and the Alaskan Peninsula, right? And this is a really interesting site. It's called On Your Knees Cave, or 49 PET 408. And it's about 10,000 years old, so not quite as old as Clovis, but again, very old. And it actually has skeletal remains. So we've talked about some of the earliest archaeology or artifacts, and this is some of the earliest people that we found, right? And not only just remains, but we're able to extract DNA from it, which is kind of cool, and tells us a lot about these people and what their life is like. And we also did, people also did isotope analysis of the bones, and we can see what they're eating. And unsurprisingly, right, most of what they're eating is fish, right? Fish and marine resources. It makes sense. If you're living on Prince of Wales Island, probably going to be a lot of fish. But like, it's nice to have the scientific confirmation of that. Also, kind of at this site, we see other instances of pretty technologically advanced civilization. Again, these are people who we know genetically come from, Northeast Asia, Siberia type region. And we see evidence of stone, especially maybe stone from not just on the island, maybe trading with other people, because I live on an island and maybe the stone's not great, but you got good stone over there on the mainland. So some kind of connection with those other people. And also kind of a distinctive boating technology. These are people who live on an island, so boats are going to be probably priority number one. And also what it shows us, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that there are these kind of genetic connections between, the people of Asia and North America during this time. So that's the super early stuff, right? But about 9,000 years ago, we start to see kind of more evidence of settling into the environment, a lot more sites, right? And especially sites set up for fishing, and not only just kind of like fishing out at sea, but also, like I said, along rivers, because that's where the salmons will run. And probably some kind of migration, right? We see this even kind of historically among Pacific Northwest people, right? Staying in one place and kind of hunkering down in the winters. And historically, this is in big cedar houses, but probably in some kind of structure, settling in one place where you can live off of your reserves a little bit, and then kind of moving around more in the summer. And we see people kind of moving out a little bit, not just being on these kind of outlying islands, but moving onto the coast, especially as the ice melts and people can move onto the land. Yep, by about 8,000. And a period of like rapid expansion, like I said, from these kind of small islands to throughout the region, and a focus on broad spectrum hunting and gathering. Right? These people eat lots of things. Well, we say fish mostly, but they hunt deer, they hunt rabbit, they hunt antelope, all kinds of stuff as well on land. Yep. We already talked about that. Okay. And by about 3,500 BC, but to about 200 AD, we still just see the emergence of what, beyond just kind of the subsistence activities, all these kind of hallmarks of what we'll see during, these later periods, is like classic Pacific Northwest people. And especially after 3,000 going towards, towards zero. And we see a switch from like broad spectrum hunting and gathering, hunting rabbits and deer and just anything you can find, to really focusing on these marine environments. especially with shellfish, right? I don't know if y'all have ever hunted shellfish, but it's nice. They don't run away. They're there. They don't bite back very much. And then you can basically feed a lot of people on clams and oysters and things like that. There's also large scale fishing at this time. And this is a really great example. This is actually from Africa, Congo River, I believe, but it's a very similar technology which we see in the Pacific Northwest. Basically, you create structures going out into the river, and you put these basket funnel things out there. And the fish swim into it, and they can't turn around and swim out because the water is rushing down there. And then you can collect it and eat the fish. So this isn't just kind of like line fishing if you were on fishing. This is kind of a large scale harvest of fish at this time period. And it's really successful. We see a really big expansion of population during this time period. And people start to store things, right? People start to harvest a whole bunch of fish when they're running, but they only run certain times of year. And they start to develop things like drying their fish out, making basically fish jerky, which can get you through the winter. Probably the thing that the Pacific Coast is most known for today is their material technology, things like especially artwork. And these are really great examples. You got kind of carved wooden boxes. These people are considered kind of master carvers of not only small things like boxes, but probably most classically totem poles. You all know what totem poles are, right? They kind of like the headband or the horseback riding Sioux of the High Plains, how Hollywood has kind of co-opted that image and made it just the generic Native American image. Probably totem poles are also very similar. Right? You've all seen or heard of totem poles. Did you know that they were like just kind of in the Pacific Northwest? Right? Most people kind of think they're just like a native thing in general. This is the area of the totem pole. Basket work, some kind of real classic basket. This is like a composite tool with a stone, like an axe or a hoe or something. On a wood, and then maybe some art objects over here. And we also see one of the few instances of metalworking in North America. In general, we don't have metalworking in North America, right? It's one of those classic distinctions between old world and new world civilizations. But in the Pacific Northwest, as well as in a couple other places, you do have cold hammered copper, which basically means you take copper nuggets, and copper is pure enough, is basically soft, so you can hit it with a hammer and shape it into different things. So while we don't see things like smelting, where you melt the metal down and pour it into a mold, or you heat it up, like traditional blacksmithing, we do see metal work, especially of copper, in this region. Our last video today I wanted to show you is about some of these kind of material technologies of the people of the Northwest. So we are back. We watched two short films, one about the ethnographic collection of Native North America, as well as about the totem pole. So someone tell me real quick, what kind of material culture did we see in those films? What are people in the Pacific Northwest making? What kind of things do they make? Spoons, yeah, real spoons. It's cool.
Boxes and masks.
Boxes. Those masks are super cool. They're almost like, ever gone to see like the Lion King Broadway one where they got the big animals that kind of move around. They're almost like that. They're often hinged and have pieces and parts for the dancers to move. So the mouth's open, or the fins go like this, or the wings of the bird do something really cool, right? And we'll take a look next time at potlatch. And during these potlatch ceremonies, oftentimes these dancers would come out, drop the sheet, or come in through the door, and they make, it's often dark with like a fire going, and you see these masked dancers come in, they're moving around, and it's very theatrical, right? It enacts these kind of mythological stories in a very real way for the people who are experiencing. Yeah, so lots of technology, especially concerning wood and basketry and weaving, right? You saw those kind of textiles. they see that really cool connection. They showed you kind of the abstractness of the art, and you know, if you've ever kind of looked at Pacific Northwest art, or if you've taken the non-Western art class here on campus. All right, these kind of very kind of classic images that we would see, right? Killer whales, turtles, these mass kind of things. And often, like they said, it's very, you know, both abstract, but also very, very rooted in nature. What is this picture of? What is this? What do you see in it? There's a couple things, actually. It's a face, right? Here's the eyeballs. Here's a mouth, maybe a nose. Is there anything else? See a bird right here, right? This one or this one, right? This is like the fin of a killer whale. Here's the killer whale. Here's its tail, right? So there's kind of layers on layers and layers, and you can see different things. And you can imagine, right? Again, if you're in one of these ceremonial vigils and there's firelight as it's flickering, you're seeing different images and you're recalling the myths and stories of your culture kind of stuff, right? So it's super interesting. And one of those like really classic Native American art traditions, which is especially kind of today, you know, is highly sought after and very expensive stuff. The bigger question, or at least a different question, right? We're thinking back to Real Engine, right, and our depictions of Native Americans on film. Was there a difference between the way that the person who was running the museum talking about these art and artifacts spoke about it versus the totem pole creator, the guy who was making the totem poles, the Kwakiutl guy or Kwakwa?
The first guy was treating the stuff like a collection.
Yeah, it's a repository of cultural knowledge, right? Look, we got 500 spoons here. We got all the spoons, right? And we'll keep this for the future, and people can come and study it and research it and learn about these cultures, right? Which is great, right? Like we have a museum on campus, and we do something very similar with pots and with artifacts and arrowheads and things like that. We act as a repository of knowledge, right? So people just don't, all this stuff doesn't just go to rich people, and you know everyone can take part in it. That's great. But how did the guy making the totem poles, that was the subject, I think it was Ben, it was Ben. How did he speak about kind of art differently, maybe? Yeah. Definitely more personal, right? My grandfather and his father's father, you know, all the way back to time and more. This is what we have done. And not only that, but this is like our culture. This is our people. This is our tradition, right? I feel deep empathy for it, or I connect to my roots through creating this, right? And we'll look at a video about potlatch next time, and how bringing back or continuing these traditions is often very important to the people of these cultures, right? Because it keeps your culture alive. And just a very different way of understanding it, right? He was talking about how every grain in the wood is a year, right? And as he's carving, he can like feel time, you know, passing or going back in time as he carves these things out. We're almost done. We only got 2 more minutes, or 2 more slides, maybe a few more. We'll see. During this time, not only do we see lots of cool art, we see the emergence of social complexity. And this is, like I kind of alluded to earlier, this is an area of really complex social organization. I like to think it's a civilization, right? In kind of the classic archaeological terms, people debate whether it is or not. Or if it's not quite, you know, maybe it's something definitely interesting and very complex, right? We see during this time period a lot of social complexity. We start to see ranking. These are people who have what's known as a ranked society. Well, in America, we have this ideology of equality, right? Every person is equal. Of course not, right? You're where you live, who you are, your race, your gender, all that stuff, you know, creates differences. But we tend to have this ideology, at least, that we're, you know, equal, more or less. In the Pacific Northwest, it was very different. Every person in that society has a rank, and you can actually quantify it. And we kind of have it, right? Maybe I'm number 1 in the class because I'm teaching, right? but for you all students, you're all the same, right? But in this society, the chief is going to be number one, and the heir to the chiefdom is going to be number two, and then there's a number three, and a number four, and number five, all the way down to the lowest person in society, right? And these are societies that have different classes. They have a chiefly class, a commoner class, and then a group of slaves. But within that, every person is ranked, right? And you kind of move up and down these hierarchies. And a lot of time and effort is spent on rank. And we'll talk again about the potlatch ceremony on Friday. But through either warfare or these competitive gift-giving exchanges, or there's often, we'll see these competitions for chiefdoms, right? And you'll have two guys going up against each other to see who's going to be chief. And oftentimes they'll have like an old grandma with them who will be like, rattle off my genealogy. And be like, he's the firstborn son of the firstborn son of the tallest pine tree in the forest. And the other one's like, well, I'm the firstborn son of the killer whales, right? They'll like try to compete about who has the higher rank. And this complexity leads to a lot of things. It leads to trade and exchange, these competitive gift giving, redistribution type ceremonies, but also a lot of warfare between these different groups as well. And in many ways, like warfare and trade and gift giving are just kind of two different sides of the same equations. And this complexity is really made possible because of the surplus, right? If you don't have a lot of stuff, it's hard to have big elaborate houses with feasting ceremonies and large 50 people canoes, right? You're going to be more focused on survival because there's so much material wealth, right? So much salmon, so much marine resources that they're able to kind of direct their society towards these kind of displays of wealth. And kind of towards the present, this will probably be the last one we'll do today. As we get closer to the present, and especially towards the colonial era, really a focus on wood, right? Or a lot of this early stuff is classic stone carving, but really the fluorescence of these wooden carving technologies, the mast, the totem poles, the big canoes, these massive cedar houses which hold like 40 or 50 people living in them, which really kind of sets up the type of people in the societies that we're going to talk about next time when they come into contact with Europeans. So come back on Friday to talk about that. Cool. All right, that's all the time we have.